Hello again, everybody. We are back looking at our travel unit for this month, and I'm Leah.
I'm Mike.
So welcome to English Digest. We're going to continue exploring Southeast Europe's charms. We've been to Dubrovnik. Now we're going to go to Kotor today, and I think it's probably going to be just as fascinating as Dubrovnik was yesterday.
Absolutely. We learned a bit about Dubrovnik, how it had some tough times during those wars in Yugoslavia in the 90s. It was damaged. It was part of the UNESCO World Heritage Endangered List, so it was in bad shape. But since the war ended and, investment and tourism and peace have returned, Dubrovnik has definitely had a renaissance. It's a lovely place. In fact, it's so safe. They filmed an expensive HBO TV show there. And as far as I know, HBO isn't in the business of filming in, dangerous war zones or countries where bad things happen, right? So that's a good sign. And today we'll be looking at a town nearby that is maybe not as famous as Dubrovnik. They've never filmed an HBO series there. But Kotor in Montenegro is another town you might want to visit if you're ever lucky enough to be in the area. And as an advantage over Dubrovnik, it hasn't quite been discovered by oceans of tourists. They don't have People Mountain, People Sea there all the time yet. So we're going to find out all sorts of cool things about Kotor, I should say, in Montenegro.
All right, but before we do that, let's take a listen to the article for one round, and we'll be right back. When you travel from Dubrovnik to Kotor, bus rides present a swift and economical option and usually take around 2 hours. However, since Montenegro is not an EU member state like Croatia, expect additional time for border customs checks. They can prolong your travel by somewhere between half an hour and an astonishing 3 hours. The trip concludes in Kotor, located at the southeastern tip of Boka Bay, frequently nominated as one of the most beautiful bays in the world. With steep cliffs plunging into the sea, the fjord-like scenery provides breathtaking views of the sparkling waters framed by a green chain of mountains. Much like Dubrovnik's Old Town, Kotor has earned its place as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, boasting a maze of cobblestone streets, charming squares, and historic Romanesque churches. Surrounding the town are the 1,000-year-old city walls, and over 1,000 steps behind these walls eventually lead up to the castle of San Giovanni. Challenging as the hike may sound, the uninterrupted views of the town and the bay below from the castle are truly a worthy reward. The mountainous landscapes of Montenegro are hinted by the country's name, derived from the Venetian phrase for Black Mountain. Shaped by diverse cultures over the past centuries, Montenegro was part of Yugoslavia before becoming a sovereign state after a referendum in 2006. Before that, communism had dominated this region during decades after World War II, manifested through Yugoslavia's federal government. Dubrovnik and Kotor are prime examples of Southeast Europe's rich cultural heritage and natural beauty. If you're eager to explore less charted European destinations, they should undoubtedly feature on your travel list. Moving into the world of Kotor. Okay, so when you travel from Dubrovnik to Kotor, that is a trip going south, heading towards the direction of Greece a bit. Bus rides present a swift and economical option and usually take around 2 hours. So when you head south towards Kotor, which is not on the Adriatic Sea like Dubrovnik, so you probably don't get these amazing views of the Adriatic Sea, but is still quite magical in its own way, you're probably going to take a bus ride, and that bus ride will present you. It will, welcome you with a swift and economical option. So it's a cheap way to go. It's cost effective. If something is economical, it's not the most luxurious item on the list, so you're going for the cheaper option. And it'll usually take around 2 hours. So it's not so far away from Dubrovnik, and it might be a good excuse to move south for a bit. However, since Montenegro is not an EU member state, which was what we were talking about a little bit yesterday, we were thinking it might be, but it looks like it's not an EU member state like Croatia is, Croatia where Dubrovnik is, expect additional time for border customs checks. So if you're going from EU to EU country, as Mike mentioned yesterday, you're not going to have any problems. You're probably going to sail right through, probably might not even have to show your passport most of the time. But when you're going from an EU country to a non-EU country, there's going to be border customs checks. So they're going to check at the border the line of the country, right? They're going to say, I'm sorry, you can't come in until we take a look at your car or what's in your car or we look at your documents.
That's true. Montenegro is a fairly new country, so that might also explain why it hasn't joined the EU quite yet, although I'm sure that is an ambition for the people and politicians there. But yes, as it is now, it's a totally different country. It's outside the Schengen zone, which is that travel area in Europe where you can travel very easily. This is outside that. So it will sort of prolong or lengthen your travel. It will cause a delay in your travel. You'll have to wait in line at the border as they check all the cars, buses, and trucks that are coming across. And that can take between a half an hour, 30 minutes. That's pretty fast.
That's not too bad.
And an astonishing 3 hours.
Wow.
I wouldn't say that's astonishing. It's a long time. But I've waited longer at airports to get through customs sometimes. But something astonishing is surprising, shocking, unbelievable, amazing, incredible, and in this case, not in a good way, although it could be in a good way. You know, it was an astonishing party. All of my friends were there. I didn't expect anyone to show up, so that can be a positively surprising thing, but it also can be slightly negative, like waiting for 3 hours at a border just to continue on with your journey. Now, it says the trip concludes, so your little, hopefully, 2 hours shorter, 2.5 hour trip, it concludes or it ends in Kotor, located at the southeastern tip of Boca Bay. So if you can find Boca Bay on a map and go down to the southeastern part, that would be sort of lower and left of Boca Bay, you will find Kotor, and it says it's frequently nominated as one of the most beautiful bays in the world. Wow, I didn't know that. I got to check out some pictures.
No kidding.
But this has been nominated as a beautiful place or one of the most beautiful bays, in this case, in the world. When you nominate something, you kind of put a name forward as a worthy or a likely winner. This is kind of like where we're in a contest. We can't judge everyone. But if you think one person is particularly good or amazing or worthy, you can say, hey, well, that guy's really good. He's done a really good job this year. I'm his boss in a company. If we're picking the employee of the year, I remember that guy has done so much good work this year. I nominate him. So, you know, those names will go into a hat, and they might pick a winner out of 5 or 6 names. Whenever we have the Oscars, right, they'll always pick 5 or 6, or actually maybe it's more like 10 movies these days.
The nominations are?
10 of those movies can win the top awards, but only one of them. But just to be in that group, to be nominated, or to use the noun form, to be a nominee, is a real honor. It says that people respect you and they think you are worthy of a prize, even if maybe you don't get it in the end. So this has been nominated as one of the most beautiful bays. A bay is like an area of land where the water kind of goes very close to the land, and the water, the land sort of forms a half circle or a bowl. It's kind of a protected area where the ocean goes inwards to the land, and you can park your boats. You can build a harbor or a port there. When we think of Sydney Harbor, Vancouver, San Francisco with the Golden Gate Bridge that crosses San Francisco Bay. So this kind of area where you have a land, probably some hills, maybe a town, and the water right there, and it's all very beautiful and picturesque.
It is, and actually this one is magically delicious because of its surrounding areas. You have these really, really gorgeous cliffs, it looks like, right? It says, with steep cliffs plunging into the sea, the fjord-like scenery provides breathtaking views of the sparkling waters framed by a green chain of mountains. That does sound absolutely delicious to me. I love some of the words that are in this sentence. So it has steep cliffs, so very sharp cliffs, right? And they plunge into the sea. If you've ever been at the beach and you're at a beach where they have pelicans, it's really fun to watch these pelicans because when they're hungry, they will dive bomb into the water. And that's kind of that plunging action. It's to move very quickly in a downward motion. So these steep cliffs move very quickly, sharply into the sea. And the word fjord can also be pronounced fjord, right? You can do fjord or fjord. These are narrow inlets of sea between cliffs. So you think about Norway being the place of all the fjords, and you have fjord-like scenery. Scenery is just the stuff that's around you that looks pretty. So you got your mountains, you got your trees, you got your water. That's the things that you're looking at around you. You can also have scenery in a play, and those are those things you move in and out. Maybe you have one scene in a play where you create a bridge in the middle of the stage, so you have to move that piece of scenery out and put it back away after that scene is over. And they provide breathtaking views, so things that you're sitting there at that bay and you're looking at these cliffs and you're going, wow, it takes your breath away. And breathtaking views of what? Well, the sparkling waters. Now, this sparkling water is not talking about carbonated water that you drink. This is talking about the shimmering and glimmering on the top of the water, probably from the sun hitting it and reflecting off of it. And it's framed by a green chain of mountains.
Sounds absolutely gorgeous. Much like Dubrovnik's Old Town, Kotor has earned its place as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, boasting a maze of cobblestone streets, charming squares, and historic Romanesque churches. So there you go. The city is just as beautiful as the landscape, the scenery around it, and it shares a lot of the same elements as Dubrovnik. It's maybe a slightly smaller place, but probably has a similar history, and of course, being in a similar part of the world, it looks in many ways also quite similar. Right. So like the Old Town, like the oldest medieval part of Dubrovnik, Kotor has earned its place as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So it is also under the protection of the United Nations and their cultural department. They're basically, preventing people from changing the buildings and keeping the historical elements there. And it boasts, or it sort of has as a wonderful, interesting feature, something that definitely will attract people. What does it boast? A maze of cobblestone streets, these narrow old streets that we find in these old medieval type towns, long before the days of cars, when people walked or traveled by horse and the city wasn't sort of laid out and planned out in an organized fashion. It was built up organically and naturally over hundreds of years. You end up with this twisted, turning network of streets. That's why we call it a maze. It's not actually a maze, designed to confuse you and send you off into dead ends and blind alleys. But unless you live there or have a map, it might be quite easy to get a little bit lost because, every corner kind of looks the same. Did we walk past this church or was that other church? Or maybe we're at the other side of I don't know where I am. It's a bit of a maze. If you've ever been to some of the older areas of Taipei or walked around in a large night market, you might get a little bit lost because it's kind of a maze. Another thing that sort of marks it out as a medieval city is the road or the streets under your feet as you walk around. You won't find sort of straight, smooth, black roads like we have today. You'll find roads made of rocks, cobblestones, these sort of medium-sized, rounded rocks that they used to build streets out of that were very good to allow horses to travel over them, especially on rainy or muddy days. They didn't end up being just, oceans of mud because it was just dirt under your feet. There were stones there. The horses' hooves could sort of grab them, get purchase on them as they moved around. But it's kind of rough if you're riding a bicycle or a modern car on a cobblestone street. Great for horse travel, not bad for being on foot, terrible for your racing bicycle and your bum as you rattle around on those stones. And charming squares, lovely little squares, plazas, palazzos, as they might call them in Italy, and historic Romanesque churches, these sort of medieval-style churches, Romanesque just being a type of architecture like Baroque or Byzantine or something like this. Romanesque takes a lot of its inspiration from old Roman buildings and churches, even though they might have been built hundreds of years later.
That's correct. And I think this is a great place for us to take a little break. We're going to listen to our Chinese teacher now.
Hello everyone, 我是派老师。今天讲解的是6月5号 Unit2 Exploring Southeast Europe's Charms in Dubrovnik and Kotor。这是第2天的课程。我们看到的是另外一座城市，叫做 Kotor 科多。而且呢，这座城市不是在 Croatia， 而是在 Montenegro。那距离 Dubrovnik 非常近，搭客运只要2个多小时就会到了。这座城市有个特点，他们有自然景观， 很像峡湾。那湛蓝的海湾被翠绿的群山团团包围。那这个群山呢，其实是像悬崖一样突出到海湾里头去，而且还有丰富的人文资产。那我们一起来看学习重点吧。请看第一段。好，第一段的第一个句子就告诉我们，这座城市 Kotor， 其实你从 Dubrovnik 过去的话，可以搭公车，应该说搭客运。Bus rides present a swift and economical option。好，所以搭客运又快又经济实惠。Economical 指的当然就是跟钱有关，很省钱，不花钱。好，那再来第二个句子呢？不过虽然说很快，但大家要注意哦。However， 那后面有解释，到底是要注意什么呢？好，你要 expect additional time for border customs checks。实际上在客运里头，又或者说在公路上行走的时间、旅行的时间，其实不是那么长，但会有一些时间要花在边境海关检查 border customs checks。 好，那在阅读文章的时候，请同学要特别注意这些因果关系的句子。我们看到 since 了，对不对？好， since 就是告诉我们原因哦，那就是因为有这些边境海关检查。好，那它不是呢像是欧盟的成员啊，那所以就会有边境的检查，就会花比较多的时间。所以我们在阅读测验的时候，常常都会遇到这样的问题，同学要有办法找得出答案。可能呢，文章就问你是什么原因导致客运从克罗埃西亚到 Montenegro 要花比较久时间，会延宕超过3个小时。答案就在第二个句子里。They can prolong your travel， 会让你整个行程的时间拉长。prolong 这个动词，请同学特别画起来。再来，我们看到第二段，那其实到了这个 Kotor 之后，有什么东西可以看呢？我们就可以看得到，这里有号称世界上最漂亮的海湾。再请看到第二个句子，我们就看到到底是怎么样一个漂亮的方法呢？原来有很多的悬崖就直直的逼近入海，就像峡湾一样 fjord-like scenery。 好，那这样子的景象会给人什么样子的感受呢？ Provides breathtaking views， 用来形容景观的是这个 breathtaking， 会让你呢叹为观止啊。好，再来我们看到第三个句子。好，Kotor 就像我们第一天所介绍的 Dubrovnik 一样，它也有自己比较历史悠久的城镇。Okay, it has earned its place as a UNESCO World Heritage Site。 原来也是联合国教科文组织世界遗址上面所登录的。It has earned its place， 所以这上面这个名录上面呢，也有它的一席之地。那后面一样 boasting， 拥有什么？我们昨天的课程才介绍 boast 这个动词，就拥有什么。原来这里也有很多的街道，就像迷宫一样，这些街道是鹅卵石铺成的，像迷宫一样。
Okay, so we're going to take a quick break and then we'll be right back. All right, so we're back in the middle of Kotor and we're wandering around with these Romanesque churches with round arches and vaults, churches with columns, all these really cool things. And surrounding the town are the 1,000-year-old city walls. So if you remember, Dubrovnik yesterday was enclosed in these walls of Dubrovnik. And today we're using surrounding the town, the city walls. Same thing, right? And over 1,000 steps behind these walls eventually lead up to the castle of San Giovanni. And that's just a castle that's up there 1,000 steps away from these 1,000-year-old city walls. As challenging as the hike may sound, you can put an as there as well in front. Challenging as the hike may sound, as challenging as the hike may sound. The uninterrupted views of the town and the bay below from the castle are truly a worthy reward. Uninterrupted views just means that there's no buildings that are going to block your view of everything down below. It's going to be a perfect open view of everything that's down below, and it makes it a very worthy reward. A worthy reward just means one that is worth your effort here of having gone on this hike and made it up, these steps, and it is worth the effort.
Absolutely. The mountainous landscapes of Montenegro are hinted by the country's name, derived from the Venetian phrase for Black Mountain. All right, so if you're heading out of Kotor, you're going to want to explore the countryside of Montenegro, and it says it's mountainous. All right, well, we already learned about some of the hills that plunge down in the fjord-like bay of Kotor itself, so finding other mountains and other hills and other plunging landscapes isn't too shocking. And anything that's described as mountainous has, yes, mountains.
Yes.
Switzerland is a very mountainous country,
yes.
As is Chile. It has a lot of mountains in that area. The central part of Taiwan is very mountainous compared to the north or the east or the west or the south. There are a lot of mountains in that area, so bring your toughest, most comfortable shoes. The mountainous landscapes of the country are hinted by the country's name, Montenegro. And this is derived, the name Monte, Negro, mountain, and black, are derived from the Venetian phrase for Black Mountain. There you go. So if you've studied Italian or Spanish or French, you might be, hey, yeah, okay, I can see that. They have that word mountain, that word black in there. That's where it comes from. So it's not exactly a perfect translation from Venetian, which would be a dialect of Italian, I imagine, but it basically traces its history, traces its roots, traces the name back to this Venetian phrase, Black Mountain. And when something's derived from it, comes from that thing, but it's probably changed over time. So you might see a modern movie or something. It's set in modern times, but they kind of took the story from, I don't know, an old Shakespeare play or something like that. In fact, West Side Story, that popular musical, that musical is derived from Romeo and Juliet. Now, of course, they changed the dialogue, changed the characters, wrote a bunch of songs, and stuff like that. But, you can kind of trace back the inspiration, the history, where it came from. And in this case, the Montenegro came from Venetian, which I imagine is, as I said, a form of Italian spoken in Venice, which would have been the big cultural and commercial power about 500 years ago in that part of the world.
And actually probably a government seat for a lot of the area,
Oh, yeah.
imagine.
Venice was a very powerful empire.
And it was shaped by diverse cultures over the past centuries. So this area, this is describing Montenegro, it has been shaped by diverse cultures, not just one culture, not just the Montenegrin culture. It's a lot of different cultures that have kind of shaped the town into what it is now, or the country into what it is now. Montenegro was part of Yugoslavia before becoming a sovereign state after a referendum in 2006. So Yugoslavia used to be a country for about 100 years. And then it was broken up into several different countries, including Montenegro, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Macedonia, and Serbia. As far as I know, I think there's about 6 different countries it was broken up into. And when that happened, around the time when that happened, Montenegro became a sovereign state, which means it's an independent state or its own state. Has its permanent population, has its defined territories, independent government. It is its own state. It's its own country after a referendum in 2006. So a referendum here, I guess, is referring to something that was put up in front of a government body and agreed to in 2006.
Very, very interesting. Before that, communism had dominated this region during decades after World War II, manifested through Yugoslavia's federal government. So that's right after the war finally ended, and after political peace finally arrived in a very kind of settled way in 2006, things were good. But before that, and especially before the war, before the early 1990s, after the fall of the sort of Russian communism, the USSR, and a lot of those Eastern European countries started to break away and have their own political leadership. Communism, under the Russians, under the Soviet Union, had dominated this region. What is communism? Communism, of course, was a political system based on public ownership of the means of production, no private ownership of land or capital. We're thinking of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Then we're thinking of Lenin and the Russian Revolution, Mao and the Chinese Communist Revolution, Castro in Cuba. That would be communist. I guess North Korea and Cuba are the only two kind of officially communist countries these days.
Interesting.
As far as I know of. But this is, yes, a political philosophy that was very popular at the end of the late 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s. And as I said, with the fall of the Soviet Union, the fall of East Germany and the Berlin Wall, communism, at least in Europe, was kind of a spent force. But for many years, from like the 1920s, 30s, especially through the post-war years until the 80s or 90s, it dominated. It was the predominant or the most common and influential political philosophy in Eastern Europe. Western Europe, of course, was centered more on freedom and democracy and capitalism, with the United States being the leader in that area. And this was manifested through Yugoslavia's federal government. Tito, of course, was the famous Yugoslavian strongman, Yugoslavia's version of Stalin or Mao, although he wasn't that close. He was actually
Slobodan Milosevic as well, right?
That was after. Yeah, that was after the fall of Yugoslavia. And Tito was interesting because he kind of tried to be a little independent of Russia, but also of the West. Anyway, so that was what had dominated in that area. Back to the article, Dubrovnik and Kotor are prime examples of Southeast Europe's rich cultural heritage and natural beauty. I think we've probably explained that, and you can look at the beautiful pictures in your magazine as well and see good examples, as these are prime examples, or really good, some of the best examples, some of the ones you would point to as the most obvious examples of the rich cultural heritage and natural beauty and wonderful history of this part of the world. So if you're eager to explore less charted European destinations, they should undoubtedly feature on your travel list. It's great to go to Paris and Rome and London and see all the stuff that everyone else sees. But maybe you want to go to somewhere less charted, off the beaten path, a little less popular, a little less common. Places where you go, I went to Kotor, and people go, where the heck is that? And you can tell them and blow their minds with what an amazing adventurous traveler you are, and at the same time, you can visit a wonderful and not so commonly seen part of the world.
We're going to blow your mind by letting you listen to the Chinese teacher one more time.
再来，请同学接着看第二段第4个句子。在这些形容地点、描述地点的文章里面，我们其实很容易看到倒装句，让我们知道某个地方它的地理位置是什么。第4个句子其实呢也是一个倒装句，真正的主词是要介绍这个几千年历史，有几千年历史非常古老的城墙 surrounding the town。但是它是把补语搬到前面去，包围这个古老城镇的是几千年历史的城墙。好，再来请同学看到第5个句子，也是比较特殊的句子哦。后面的 challenging as，这个 as 才是真正的连接词。那我们知道说，像 as 表示虽然，它呢是可以做这样子的倒装，它可以把想要强调的形容词搬到最前面去。也就是说 the hike may sound challenging， 这整段健行就是呢，你沿着这条路径去走，虽然有挑战性，这是一个 as 是 challenging as， 这是一个表示虽然它的倒装句，它把形容词 challenging 提到前面去了。The uninterrupted views of the town。Uninterrupted 这边跟插话没有关系，跟你讲话讲到一半被打断没有关系，而指的呢是这个边的景观是一览无遗的，一览无遗的。好，再来请同学看到第3段了。第3段的第1个句子 The mountainous landscapes of Montenegro。 好，我们知道 Montenegro 它的地貌是怎么样呢？是多山的地形。那其实从国名我们就知道这个国家是什么样子了。原来它的名称呢 derived from， 那我们可以看得到这里的 derived from 放在名字的后面，用逗点隔开了，对吧？好，这个名字源自于哪里？ derive from 那就是源自于 Venetian phrase for Black Mountain。原来 Montenegro 所代表的呢，就是黑山的意思。那第二个句子 shaped by diverse cultures over the past centuries， 这也是一个分词构句，所指的呢，其实就是 Montenegro 这个国家有多元的文化。好，再来看到第4段最后一个句子 If you're eager to explore less charted European destinations， 请同学把 less charted 画起来。这里所指的当然就是这个地方是比较少观光客会去的 less charted。 欧洲有很多景点，但这里呢比较少台湾人会去。如果你想去比较少人去的，那就可以参考以上这2个景点。好，以上就是我们对第2天课程所做的中文讲解。Thank you. See you next time.
All right, everybody. So we have traveled to Dubrovnik and Kotor. Hopefully you will too at some point. Don't go during those peak months. For English Digest, I'm Leah.
And I'm Mike.
Bye.
Take care.